just climbs off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
There are days when we need unstoppable energy. A lifeline to face down challenges so that we can soar. In those critical moments, we dig deep, and life's emergencies require unstoppable power. Unstoppable dedication to safety and high performance. It's in these moments that we are unstoppable together. Concord, the heart of your aircraft.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing like showing up in a grand style for Ron Fagen and David Frasca. Welcome to Warbirds in Review. Thank you, Ron Fagen, over here on his beautiful P40. And David, he's sneaking off already. Thank you guys for bringing the beautiful airplanes. My name is Connie Boland, running up here at the last minute to say welcome to Warbirds in Review. Thank you to all of you. Quick shout out to Scott's Miracle Grow that makes this possible. Ron Fagen, who just got out of his beautiful airplane, for the Kwanzaa here behind us. And David Hartman will be on tap here very shortly with our guest. And the intro for the video, please.
It was a typically beautiful Honolulu morning, Sunday, December 7, 1941. Some were on their way to church, others sleeping off Saturday night fun, while the military and civilians enjoyed their quiet, comfortable, complacent dawn. 6 Japanese aircraft carriers were steaming to within flying range of Pearl Harbor and Ford Field. At exactly 7:48 a.m., the first of 353 Japanese planes started dropping bombs on the bulk of our country's Pacific Fleet, which was mostly lined up, tied up, still in the water, in the tiny harbor, sitting ducks. 9 minutes later, at 7:57 that awful morning, a radio message crackled across the island. Quote, "Air raid, Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill." In the stunning 2-hour surprise attack by Japanese aircraft and submarines, 18 ships were sunk or damaged. Most of nearly 300 Navy, Marine, and Air Corps planes were decimated where they sat on tarmacs. Only a handful of American military aircraft got off the ground. 29 Japanese planes were shot down that morning. More than 2,400 of our Marines, sailors, soldiers, and civilians died. Nearly 1,200 were wounded. The world would never be the same. In a speech to Congress and the country the next day, President Roosevelt, declaring war on Japan, referred to the previous day of the attack, quote, "a date that will live in infamy."
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese fleet commander, who masterminded the attack, said, quote, "I fear all we have done today is to awaken a great sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve," unquote. Little did he know. After the 2 waves of aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor, a 3rd wave was canceled, and Admiral Yamamoto sailed his fleet away from the islands. At the same time, he ordered another, smaller fleet, including 2 small aircraft carriers, to sail north to attack the American territory, Aleutian Islands. His plan was a diversion to make American military leaders think that Japan's main target was the U.S. West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington State. His real target would be at Midway Island, where he hoped to demolish the remainder of America's Pacific Fleet. The Aleutians, not a vacation destination then or now. More than 1,200 miles of volcanic islands stretching southwest from mainland Alaska toward Japan. It was, and is, an ugly place for human beings. Craggy mountain peaks, barren, bitter cold with high winds, snow and ice, rain, and dense fog. Few animals, no trees, and no wonder, mostly not inhabited. The attack on Pearl Harbor had alerted the United States to the Japanese threat to the American mainland. So in early 1942, just 3 months after Pearl Harbor, construction began on an Alaska highway to carry troops and war materiel to Alaska from the lower 48 states. The road would stretch across much of Western Canada. In June 1942, that small Japanese fleet attacked 2 of those godforsaken islands, Attu and Kiska. Over the next 14 months, the 2 sides battled to a bloody standstill with heavy losses on both sides. The human cost for American troops in proportion to the number of troops engaged was second only to American losses at Iwo Jima. Over those months, as many as 6 fighter squadrons, mostly P-40s but also P-38s and P-39s, were based in Alaska and brought the fight to the Japanese, all the way to Attu and Kiska. Again, losses were heavy. 45 planes were lost in combat, another 185 were lost to weather and accidents. Many pilots died. But the only World War II combat on American soil was over. Just a few days after that original attack on Attu and Kiska, American sea and air attacks overwhelmed the Japanese fleet at Midway, sinking 4 of its aircraft carriers. It was the turning point in the Pacific War. Please welcome our 2 guests this morning. You just saw his picture up there, Bob Brocklehurst, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, earned his wings in 1941. Bob? And Karen Abel on his left. Karen started, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but you became involved with learning about the Aleutian campaign because of your grandfather, who was a P-40 pilot, right?
Yep, that's right.
And how old were you when you learned about this? How did you learn about his experience?
When he passed in 1996, we discovered an entire briefcase full of his logbooks, photos, newspaper clippings, communications that he had had with the Department of Defense, and that's what got me interested. I didn't do anything about it until 2012.
But in just the last 6 years, though, you have become apparently the most expert historian on the planet on the Aleutian campaign.
No, first of all, no expert, just very passionate about wanting to know about the campaign. It's not a very well-known campaign. It's equally as valuable to any other campaign out there. And as I started to talk about it in 2012, to just people I knew in my community or even in World War II historians or people who were enthusiasts about the war, they didn't know that campaign even happened. And it just inspired me to tell the story of those who served out there.
Bob, your wings in 1941, how did you learn that you would be going to Alaska?
Well, after graduating in September 1941, assigned to Selfridge Field, Michigan, P40s, under Jack Chennault, one of the 7 sons of General Chennault of Chinese fame. And on Saturday after Pearl Harbor Day, we were on a troop train headed for California to pick up P40s from the depot to fly to Alaska.
And what was that flight like? Now, think 1941 flying to Alaska. What was that experience like?
Well, some of us had as many as 15 hours in a P40. Others had as little as 8. The airplanes became available by 2s and 3s, and as they became available, I guess they drew numbers. The senior people took the first airplanes, and when mine came up, there was 2 other guys and myself, and it took us from December of 41 to I finally landed in Alaska March the 5th, 1942, with the last of the flights due to a lot of circumstances. We lost 6 out of 24 airplanes on the way up, lost 1 pilot and 1 aircraft due to a lot of circumstances, airplane problems. They were building the Alaskan Highway then, and we landed at remote airfields that they were just recently made, and refueled out of drums to refuel our airplanes, and then we learned to fly in Alaska.
How did you navigate to get up there?
Well, we didn't have any navigation past Edmonton, and not too much there. We did have some hand-drawn maps about this big that airline pilots had made, but the rest of it was just flying a heading and a route through through Fort St. John, Fort Nelson, Whitehorse, and on up to Fairbanks, and then down to Anchorage.
So you land in Alaska. At what point do you begin to fly down the islands?
Well, there was the 18th Fighter Squadron up there with P-36s, and we had P-40s with the 11th Squadron we'd been to come. And after we got up there and flew for a while, they decided, because the 18th Squadron had the old P-36s, the new squadron with junior second lieutenants had the P-40s. They swapped us half and half, took our airplanes with us, and when I got transferred to the 18th, and they took the senior second lieutenants took our P-40s away from us, and we got the P-36s. But it was the best thing, because they had some experience flying in Anchorage. They taught us how to fly, and that really saved a bunch of our lives flying out down the Aleutians.
So try to describe for us what it was like flying. Try to describe for us what it was like flying down to the islands in terms of weather.
Well, you got 250 days of bad weather, rain, snow, fog. Temperatures weren't too bad. I think the mean temperature was somewhere around 38 degrees, but there was no nav age. It's 1,500 miles from the southwest corner of Alaska clear out there at 2, including the Alaska Peninsula. And you had a lot of bad weather. You had the fog banks, and you couldn't depend on the fog, but as quick as you can snap your fingers, in a day like today, a snowstorm or rainstorm would blow it down off the mountains, and you'd had no visibility whatsoever. We flew. We got our scrambles, never seemed to catch anything, but we would take off under as low as a 300-foot ceiling, and we would not climb up through unless we had some indication that you could see mountain tops above the overcast, which we could go up and be on top of it, and then undercast, and you could go be vectored out for maybe an hour over the Pacific or somewhere, and then released, and you'd come back and find a mountain top that you knew, and let down through and break out.
What's the term willy-wah mean?
Well, the winds were generally from the north, and it's just like water behind a dam. You get a break in the dam or in the floods today, and that water suddenly twists and pours through the gap and speeds up. And you could have up to 100-mile-an-hour wind, maybe more. I know a PBY that was tore up by it, and it would really bounce you around and twist you around. We generally flew in the P40s level or higher than the mountaintops to avoid it if we flew on the south side of the chain, or we flew on the north side.
Describe the weather, Karen. That just mentioned willy-wahs.
It's like the Venturi effect, where the speed increases and it's twisting and turning. And in the P40s, if you hit one, it would bounce you around real good. And I didn't taste more than one or two because we avoided them. There were airplanes tore up by them. There were airplanes on the ground tore up now and then if they were near an airfield or something like that. But basically, you avoided the willy-wah.
When you were a squadron commander at this point, yes?
Well, I was a squadron commander from in 43 to September 43 when I left.
How much combat flying did you actually do during that period?
Well, we never counted sorties or anything. All we did, we flew alerts, we flew patrols, we flew vectors, but with clouds and anything, we never caught anybody. I think there was about, the statistics are true, there's about 45 Japanese airplanes shot down up there, but we lost about 185 due to weather and accidents. The worldwide statistics show something like 4 enemy shot down to 1 American lost by accidents or whatever. Up in Alaska, it was just the opposite. We lost about 185 airplanes, 4 to 1 in accidents and weather. And at one time, I knew almost 100 airplanes myself that were lost due to weather.
Did you ever be in a situation where you led a bunch of other airplanes through terrible weather?
Yes, sir. Nothing we couldn't handle, but we did. Yes, it was typical to take off under as low as without fog, 300-foot ceiling, you could see for miles. So you had good visibility. And as long as the overcast, as long as the mountaintops were sticking up so you could find one you knew to let down. And but I was taking 12 it was typical. I took 12 airplanes on the way to ADAC at Atka, and we were all landing in string, and as I was landing, a snowstorm came off the just northwest corner of the runway, and had to go on instruments, so I yelled, "I'm going around," because I knew my guys couldn't land. And so I went around, and there's a big hole out there, nice weather, even less clouds today here. And I got out, and I only got 11 airplanes. I got one missing. But he had landed, and I didn't know it was. We flew out for 45 minutes. The storm cleared and went back and landed. A normal type of procedure, really. And it was my wingman, and he was climbing into his airplane to go join us, because I had a solid rule: you will not break formation. And he broke formation. But that was sort of typical. It happened quite often.
Did you have any commanders above you find fault at any time with how you flew or what you were doing?
Well, when I was in the 11th and the 18th squadrons, and then when they went down to Amchitka, then I missed the action going into Amchitka on Kiska. I went back to Anchorage. We formed the 344th Squadron, and I became squadron commander of that. Then we went from Umnak. We leapfrogged everything. Went down from Umnak to Adak to Stage, and then we flew out northwest to avoid Amchitka radar, where our American forces were. The Japanese at Kiska, way out north of At-2. When we got into At-2, it was all overcast, but the runway would only take 6 airplanes. So I took 6 pilots and their 6 airplanes. We had a 2,800-foot runway, one end at the Pacific and one end at a 30-foot deep hole in the ground, half-acre size, where they dug out the muskeg, and we operated off of 2,800 feet there for a couple of months, and the rest of my outfit was on Shemya.
Yeah.
But the Japanese were no airplanes out there, so we didn't provide the air defense, and there were no front lines then, so we really, due to the winds, the no front lines, you couldn't drop smoke, so we weren't able to do any strafing or bombing for the Japanese either. So I basically missed the major action by not staying in the 18th and going back and forming the new squadron.
So how disappointed were you about that?
The whole outfit was disappointed.
Oh.
The whole outfit. They were all gung-ho, ready to go, and you know, there's nothing like the camaraderie in a fighter squadron when you got good guys trained that would fly in any type of weather and close up and stay with you. It was just great. I mean, they were really disappointed.
Karen, as you listen to all this, as much time now as you've spent in the islands, describe the islands and the weather that you've experienced.
Well, I've just mainly said that, but I was on Kodiak Island, Cold Bay at the end of the Aleutian Peninsula, Umnak. I kept there 2 airplanes on alert at Dutch Harbor later on. I was at Atka, Adak, and I was the first fighter pilot to land on At-2 and on Shemya, where I had most of my outfit. And I kept the 6 airplanes on alert at At-2 and 2 at 4 at Dutch Harbor at different times. And my main outfit was on Shemya, and we all had the same experience. You'd be flying out with training missions and training new people, and they'd be out, and the weather would come in like that, and they'd learn to fly around like we taught them, and until the weather moved out, and then you could land.
Did the Japanese ever attack you and your airplanes, your squadrons?
No, sir. The Japanese only bombed Dutch Harbor about June the 3rd and 4th of 1942, and then they landed at Kiska and At-2, and the 11th, the 18th, the 54th, and some bomber outfits from Amchitka did all the fighting down at, and the Canadian outfits too, Karen's outfit, at Kiska, and shot all the aircraft down. Oh. And then the Japanese snuck out of Kiska by submarines in about July of 1943, and we didn't go into At-2 to fight them until early 43, and they ended the fighting there about September 43, I think.
And then the Japanese just vacated, or were they driven out?
The Japanese were all killed. They even made the banzai attack. They blew themselves up with hand grenades. I think we finally captured 27, took them back to the United States. And I was in Alaska the last 2 years on commemoration, and they said of the 27 Japanese captured on At-2, they took them back into the States, and only 2 of them wanted the people in Japan to know that they were alive because they were supposed to die in combat, and the rest of the people didn't want, the rest of the Japanese did not want their country or their relatives notified that they were still alive.
Yeah.
Wow. Karen, tell me about your grandfather.
My grandfather his name is Robert W. Lynch. People knew him as Roddy or Rod. I don't know how he got that nickname, but that's how I knew him as, or I called him Papa. He never talked about his service, ever.
Huh.
He had his medals. He had his medals and his a picture of his plane, which was named Snookums. On his wall, he had his uniform, which
Who was Snookums?
was my name of my grandmother. That's what he called her, Snookums, I guess. I never heard him call him that, but we had to have it.
But he flew P-40s.
He flew P-40s.
Yep.
He learned on a Tiger Moth, went to a Harvard, and then went to P-40s, and he did that all in about 9 months.
Harvard's the Canadian-British version of the T6.
T6.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what has your experience been in all these years of studying the Aleutians and going there? As you hear Bob describe his experiences, what comes to mind for you as you travel through the islands and take people there?
The islands are interesting. The islands are actually quite beautiful when the sun is out. They are stunning. But when the weather turns bad, it's pretty miserable. So mostly I would say I have not experienced a Willy Wah. I've been there 3 times. 3 times meaning all the way out to Attu, Kiska, Atka, Umnak, Dutch Harbor.
Okay,
Dutch
is
Harbor.
Attu the further...
The most westward island.
Westward island? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when the fog comes in, sometimes you might have a 100-foot ceiling. This year when we went, almost the entire trip there was 100-foot ceilings. It was just covered in fog. And it just makes you wonder how anyone can fly and land. And the mountains come out of nowhere. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's the sea, and then these giant volcanic mountains coming out of nowhere. It just is miraculous that anyone could have flown there.
Well,
and that goes for the Japanese. If when we're on Kiska and the weather is terrible, I'm sure the Japanese soldiers were also thinking, "What on God's name am I doing here? Why am I defending this island in the middle of nowhere?" But it had to, they had to do it, and we had to do it also.
Bob, how challenging was it to train new pilots to deal with all the weather that you described?
Well, we got some experience by then, and we taught them as we were taught to fly up there and in the weather. And I remember we had 2 second lieutenants down from Anchorage during the time of the P40s. We checked them out. We had them up one day flying. One of those snowstorms. Our landing procedure was come in low, fast, pull up in a circle, put the gear down, and last. The shortest time you're at your lowest speed in case of an enemy attack. Well, this snowstorm moved in. So these guys knew my procedure, followed the procedure. They come in fast, pull up, put the landing gear down, go into the clouds, come out, the runway's here, and they're lined up. And they did that for 2 or 3 or 4 times, every time pulling up, going around. And I thought we were going to have to take the anti-aircraft and shoot them down. But they finally lined up. Now, us old heads, we just say, hey, nobody's going to bother us a day like this. We just stayed underneath and circled around and landed. But you had to have air discipline, and the rule was you will not break formation. And it was common, even for me as a second lieutenant, you start out over that cold Pacific, and the engine starts running rough. It didn't, but you'd call in and say, sir, my engine's running rough. Is the gauges all right? Yes, sir. Stay in formation. So that's what we used to do to the new guys. When they say, sir, my engine's running rough, your gauges look all right? Yes, sir. Stay in formation. But may I add one thing? We went to flying school in February 1941. 1,500 young guys, ages 20 to 27. You couldn't be over 27 when you graduated. Out of the 1,500, they said, look around when you started. 1/3 of you won't be here. We graduated 991 guys out of 1,500 in the Army Air Corps in September 1941. We were immediately, when war was declared, sent to all the battlefields everywhere around Air Base. So we lost 251 guys out of 41G in the war years. Afterwards, we organized and we had a reunion every year to our 75th reunion, where we get 100, 125 guys out. In our 75th reunion 2 years ago, we were down to 16 guys. We're now down to 14, and the youngest is 98, the oldest is 101, 41G.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bob's the 98-year-old guy, by the way.
That's a young 98, though.
Karen, when you take people down to the islands, what do you do with them there?
Well, we fly into ADAC, and ADAC right now was one of the biggest bases in the Aleutians during the campaign. It is now mostly the remnants of a Cold War base. I think ADAC only has a population of maybe 100 and some people year-round. So we take them around the Cold War base, and then we get on a 72-foot marine vessel, and we start sailing towards Kiska and Attu, and we get skiffed on shore, and we spend the day hiking the old remnants of the bases.
Right. So
there's the Japanese on Kiska have all their guns. Most of their guns they left behind still in there. We see a lot of Japanese tunnel systems that are still standing, brilliantly constructed. The craftsmanship in them is actually quite remarkable. We go to the old Marston Matting runways that are still there. We still find bombs, grenades, bullets, you name it.
Wow.
And we teach people about what happened up there.
Yeah, Bob, in reading some of the material about when you were there, they talked about the Japanese going up in the mountains. Did they go up in the mountains, or Karen, jump on this if you want? But would they do that to avoid being hit, or the base being hit? Why would they go up in the mountains?
Better vantage point.
Ah.
Now, whenever you're looking down on somebody, you have much better vantage point.
Yeah.
So as the troops are landing and walking through the valley, they were stationed on either side, well dug in, because they had been there for a year by the time Americans landed on Attu.
Right. So you never, flying your airplanes with your buddies, you never attacked the Japanese bases?
Well, the 11th and the 18th, which I'd been in, were. But I got, right before they moved down to Amchitka, which was just east of Kiska, to do that, I was transferred back up to Anchorage to start the new squadron. So I missed it. But then when we went out at Attu, there was the Japanese had landed in 3 different places on the north side of Attu. But there's no front line. There's white covered rugged mountain peaks. The peaks weren't over 2,500 feet, maybe 3,000 feet high at the most, but there was no front lines. And the winds up there, like here the winds are blowing here, and that end of the stands the winds are blowing it this way. so you couldn't drop smoke to identify, so we were no help to them.
Yeah, they couldn't see, and they couldn't see
I'll
it.
tell you, this young lady, Karen, is amazing. She works with the National Park Service up there in Alaska. She's made more trips up and down there and on boat, taking 3-week trips, leading expeditions, working with Japanese people from Japan who are recording their part in the activities up there. And she's an amazing woman from what she's done. I take my hat off to her and what she's doing.
Well, I do that so that I can tell the story of those who served. So I take my hat off equally to you and all your comrades.
Yeah. What's it like, Karen, for you to, with your grandfather's experience and him not talking about any of this, and then you digging all this information out? What's it like for you to meet Bob and hear all of this firsthand from somebody who was flying with your grandfather?
Oh, it's emotional. It's great. It reassures me as to the path that I'm on and why I do what I do. So my grandfather always felt like the Aleutian campaign was a forgotten about item in World War II history from the Canadian side, but there's a lot of American veterans who feel the same way. So I get to hear Bob's story, and then I get to repeat them and just speak for them when they don't have a voice for themselves, especially for the ones who've passed on.
Bob, when did you leave Alaska?
September of '43. Of the 8 pilots I took out there, 6 in aircraft and 2 in spares, a year later, 5 of them were dead due to accidents in combat.
And where did you go next?
I went to Richmond, Virginia, and checked out P-47s, got a P-47 outfit, moved up to Andrews Air Force Base to train them, and that was Camp Springs Army Airfield then, and we were all packed to go overseas, trucks packed, airplanes ready, and said goodbye to the family. And we were leaving the next morning for a port call and got a telegram that night saying, "Stop, don't go to the port. We don't want any more organizations over here. Send us all your second lieutenants that are qualified in P-47s and stay there and you'll be a replacement unit." So I never got to go over there either.
And what about the rest of your career? You flew a lot of airplanes.
I was first pilot in 18 different aircraft. I flew every fighter the Air Force had, from a P-36, P-38, P-39, P-40, P-47, P-51, and the F-86 jet, and about 18 different types of aircraft.
What was the experience after flying all these propeller-driven reciprocal engine planes? What was it like to crawl into an F-86 and fly it?
Well, it's different in a way. As somebody asked me the other day, it seemed like it's mechanical because you took off with maybe 800 gallons of fuel. You used 200 gallons to get the altitude up in the 27,000 feet. You used 400 gallons to cruise, 200 gallons for a landing in round figures, and when you land, no matter what altitude at your landing base, you start at 20,000 feet, made a penetration of 5,000 feet a minute to land, and that was every time entirely different from what you do in a propeller airplane. Right. But it was great. Your headwinds had less effect on you due to your speed, so you were hitting your ETAs usually a minute, maybe half a minute right along.
What goes through your mind when you think back in detail about that experience of that time you spent in Alaska?
Well, I have a lot of memories of a lot of great guys. I do about 6 talks a year, have from 15 years or more, and I tell the stories, their names, and how they were, but there's nothing like the camaraderie of a fighter squadron where you got guys, whether I'm part of it or the leader of it, that are together, will go anywhere, follow their leader, and you take them there and you bring them back safe. There's just nothing like it in this world. I found downhill skiing is maybe sort of comparable, the most thing comparable to flying a fighter airplane. Yet, but yesterday, I seen people do things in an airplane I didn't know an airplane could do.
Welcome to Oshkosh. Right? Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Brocklehurst and Karen Abel. Thank you both very much.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, sir. Thank Karen.
Sam Bass, you're up, man, and with your guests to go, Sam.
Thank you, David.
Sam's an extraordinary aviator with 35,000 pilot hours, by the way. Sam, go.
Oh, yeah. We want to talk here a little bit about the airplane, and we've got two airplanes here. The airplane on my right, this is courtesy of Rudy, Lucille, and David here. Frasca, they brought this airplane up from Champaign. Is that correct, where you have it? And we want to thank them for bringing the airplane up here so you people can see it. The other airplane over here, this is Ron Fagen's airplane. This is Ron, and Ron's going to tell us a little bit about this airplane. And this is the Fagen Fighters World War II Museum. Did I get that right? Okay, it's Ron and Diane Fagen. So, Ron, can you get up here and tell us a little bit about this airplane, the paint job. What's the paint job on the airplane?
Okay. The paint job is, of course, after the Aleutian Tigers, and Jack Chennault. That's Jack Chennault was the son of Claire Chennault, of the Flying Tigers in China fighting the Japanese, and Jack, his son, was got to be the commander of the group in the Aleutian Islands, and he wanted a tiger paint job, kind of like his father,
yeah.
And that's how that Aleutian Tiger got to be part of their squadron.
Okay, tell us a little bit about the engine and the horsepower on this airplane.
Well, I might be plus or minus quite a bit here, Sam, but this.
Well, they don't know the difference.
They don't know the difference. Oh, I think they do. It's about 1,350 some horsepower. In air emergency, it could go to 1,550 horsepower when you had to use it. And it's a V12 Allison, and they're a great engine. They were made by General Motors Company. And it's got probably, I might be wrong on this too, but probably at least 50% fewer parts than the Merlin Rolls-Royce engine, and they're both V12s. But this is just a single-stage supercharger in this. The airplane performs wonderful up to 12,000 feet, and then going up to 20, it slows things down. It starts losing its manifold pressure, but it's a great airplane.
So there was, I think, somewhere like 13,700 of these things built during this period, which started in 1938. How many of those do you think are still flying now?
You know, I'm not sure. David, do you know? About 20 some.
About 20?
Yep. So anyway, but they're a great airplane.
Okay, what theater of operations did this thing fly in?
Okay, this particular P40 was on the lend-lease program, and it was shipped. It was built. Let me read it here so I don't get it screwed up. Make sure. It was in. It was a batch of 335 aircraft in 1942, and then they were shipped to from Buffalo, New York, to New York, and shipped on a ship, and it was allocated to the Soviet Air Force. And from New York, it went to England. From England to Russia, and a lot of them. So this one was shipped by ship to Russia, but a lot of them took the Northern Trail, Buffalo, Minnesota, Montana, Canada, and across the Bering Sea. And in Alaska, they would transfer to Soviet pilots to fly across the Bering Sea. And I can't imagine a new pilot hopping in a P40 and going across the Bering Sea into Russia with it, but that's what they did. This particular airplane was assigned to the Guard Unit 20 GVIAP until November 10th, 1944. It took a cannon shell through the fuselage fuel tank, never exploded, but run him out of fuel, and he did a wheel-up landing. Him and one of his other pilots, they landed 1,500 yards apiece. The one airplane was damaged severely. This one was damaged very lightly. And this is actually at our P40 shop. This is the airplane we used to build our jigs off of, because it was a real straight airplane.
What typical armament did the P40 carry?
This one here?
Well, just typical. That's good. Just go with this one.
Pardon?
Just go with this one.
This one right here, yeah. Well, this one here, this P40, like I say, was the Russian flown during World War II, and the squadron was jumped by 4 AMI-109s, and but 2 of these survived, and this particular airplane went to they took it to a makeshift museum in Russia, and that's why the condition was so good on it. When we rebuilt it, we drilled every rivet out, and we went to the extra effort, and we put 75% of the original skins back on this airplane because we wanted it as original as possible. And but it's a great flying airplane. Crosswinds give you a challenge sometime. I've been flying P40s, not as long as the Frascas, however, but I finally started to learn how to land it in a crosswind after 20 years.
Well, your machine guns you have, what is it, 6 30 calibers?
Yeah, we have 6 50 caliber machine guns, and we actually we actually can. We have real machine guns. We can shoot the machine guns in this airplane if we wanted to.
Oh, really?
But these are phony guns in here now, but we do have the real ones, and it's capable of shooting and loading ammunition for 50 caliber, 6 of them.
Now, under each wing you have 3 external points here and 3 external points over there. What did you carry there?
Well, you could call, I'm not sure. It was a small rocket.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure when, if John Fallis was here, he could answer that exactly real quick.
Do you know?
I don't know.
Do you know, David?
I think you could mount basically a small 35-pound bomb on it. Wasn't that it? Yeah, I think basically that was you could mount a small bomb on those, but I'm not 100% sure, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, we sure do appreciate you guys bringing your airplanes here. That's quite a thing for the expense, just so these people can see these airplanes and be educated about World War II. You're wonderful folks.
One more thing. Sure. One more thing is this particular K model P40. There's another K model P40 with Aleutian paint job that we sold to the Texas Flying Legends. And at our air show 5 years ago, both of these P40s were shot down. Same fighter group, same day, 1,500 yards apiece. 5 years ago, we put them in the air side by side together, first time since 1944. So they got to fly again together.
Thank you very much.
So just one other interesting thing. Karen, who was just out here talking about her grandfather did fly this exact airplane in 1941 in the Aleutians. And I just found that out. She traced it back to her logbooks. I just found that out about 2 years ago, and we really never knew the history of that. And that was a pretty amazing thing to meet someone who actually flew this airplane. So
that airplane.
Now,
was he in the RCAF?
That's right, 101st Squadron. Yep.
So this was in Canada then.
This was in Canada. It's not painted accurate to his aircraft, but this serial number was the actual aircraft he had flown. And I think that's how I met Karen. So.
Yeah, and I think most of you understand that this motif on this is for the Flying Tigers. And it's not you said it's not a particular airplane for the Flying Tigers. It's representative of the Flying Tigers. That emblem up there of the panda bear, that Tex Hill was in that outfit, but this is not his particular number. Thank you, folks. Appreciate your attention.
Thank you.